The morning alarm shrieked across New Geneva's residential district with the same mechanical precision it had for the past 47 years, ever since the Dominion claimed Earth. Kalen Voss pressed his palm against the bioscanner beside his apartment door, watching the green light flicker as it transmitted his daily compliance data to the orbital command stations. Another day of documented obedience, another day of survival. The streets below buzzed with the familiar rhythm of subjugation. Humans moved in predetermined patterns, their paths monitored by floating sentinel drones that hummed like metallic insects. The Veltar had perfected the art of control without chains, using psychological conditioning and technological surveillance to transform humanity into a docile workforce. Children born after the conquest knew no other existence than this carefully orchestrated submission. Kalen descended the transport tube toward Sector 7, where he maintained the atmospheric processors that kept the alien settlements habitable. His reflection in the polished walls showed a man approaching 40, with steel-gray eyes that had witnessed the last gasps of human independence. Unlike the younger generations, he remembered the taste of freedom, and that memory burned like acid in his chest. The processing facility sprawled across what had once been Central Park, its crystalline spires reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for something forever out of reach. Veltar overseers glided between the human workers on their hover platforms, their elongated forms draped in flowing robes that concealed their true alien anatomy. They communicated through harmonic frequencies that resonated in the bones of nearby humans, a constant reminder of their otherworldly nature. Maintenance technician Voss, the synthesized voice of Overseer Nixdal, vibrated through the facility's neural network, speaking directly into Kalen's mind. Report to Processing Chamber 12. Atmospheric readings indicate fluctuation in the nitrogen balance. Kalen gathered his tools and made his way through the labyrinthine corridors, past rows of human workers whose eyes had long since lost their spark. He had perfected the art of appearing broken while maintaining the fire within, a skill that had kept him alive and undetected for decades. The Veltar prized efficiency above all else, and Kalen had made himself indispensable through his technical expertise. Processing Chamber 12 hummed with alien machinery that converted Earth's atmosphere into the methane-rich environment the Veltar required for their settlements. As Kalen calibrated the nitrogen injectors, his fingers moved with practiced efficiency while his mind wandered to darker thoughts. Hidden beneath the facility's foundation lay a network of abandoned subway tunnels, and within those tunnels, a growing movement that the Dominion had yet to discover. The Resistance called themselves the Undercurrent, a name that reflected their hidden nature and their determination to flow around the obstacles of alien oppression. They numbered barely 300 across the entire continent, but their ranks included former military officers, scientists, and individuals like Kalen who had maintained their positions within the Dominion's infrastructure. Their greatest asset was their invisibility. To the Veltar, humans appeared as interchangeable components in their vast machine of civilization. As the shift ended and the facility's workers filed toward the transport hubs, Kalen noticed a subtle pattern in their movement. Zara Thorne, a communications specialist from Sector 4, adjusted her toolkit in a specific sequence. Dmitry Korvin, who managed supply distributions, paused at the water recycling station for exactly 17 seconds. These were signals, invisible to alien observers but crystal clear to those who knew how to read them. Tonight, the undercurrent would gather, and Kalen sensed that something fundamental was about to change. The weight of humanity's submission pressed down on every soul within the Dominion's grasp, but beneath that crushing force, pressure was building toward an explosion that would reshape the very foundation of their conquered world. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath what had once been Grand Central Station stretched into darkness like the gullet of some primordial beast. Kalen descended through a maintenance shaft, his movements guided by the faint luminescence of bioluminescent markers that the Resistance had cultivated from modified algae. The tunnels had become a sanctuary where humanity's true voice could finally speak without fear of alien surveillance. 23 figures emerged from the shadows as Kalen reached the central gathering chamber. Each face bore the same weathered expression of individuals who had learned to wear masks of compliance while nurturing rebellion in their hearts. Zara Thorne stood near a jury-rigged communication array, her fingers dancing across salvaged control panels that she had painstakingly assembled from scrapped Dominion technology. Her dark hair was streaked with premature silver, a testament to the stress of living a double life for over a decade. "The orbital surveillance patterns have shifted," Dmitry Korvin announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had once commanded Earth's northern defense grid. His massive frame filled the space near the tunnel entrance, and his scarred hands gestured toward a holographic display that flickered with intercepted data streams. "Command vessel Vexthera has repositioned itself over the Pacific settlements. They're preparing for something significant." Lydia Blackwood sat cross-legged on a makeshift cushion, her pale eyes fixed on a collection of psychological profiles she had compiled over years of careful observation. As a former therapist who now worked in the Dominion's Human Integration Department, she had unique access to the alien mindset. "The Veltar hierarchy is showing signs of stress fractures," she said quietly. "Their confidence in human pacification isn't as absolute as they pretend. They fear something, though I haven't determined what." The gathering continued with reports from cells across the continent. Oren Cassius, a tall man with angular features who worked directly within the alien administrative structure, provided intelligence about Dominion's supply chains and communication protocols. His position as a data analyst in the Central Command Hub made him invaluable, but also placed him in constant danger of discovery. Every piece of information he smuggled to the Resistance could potentially expose the entire network. Mira Ashland emerged from the deeper tunnels, her slight frame belying the deadly skills she had honed during years of urban reconnaissance. Her role as a waste management coordinator allowed her to move freely between sectors, mapping the underground infrastructure that connected the major population centers. She had discovered something that made her hands tremble as she activated a portable holographic projector. "I've found them," Mira whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of surface transport systems. "The disappeared ones. The humans who were selected for advanced integration and never returned to the general population." The hologram revealed a vast underground complex beneath the Veltar Administrative Center, filled with rows of cylindrical chambers that pulsed with bioelectric energy. Within each chamber, the ghostly outline of a human form floated in suspension, connected to alien machinery by networks of organic conduits. The sight sent a collective shudder through the assembled Resistance members. "Psychological conditioning?" Dmitry asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected something far worse. Lydia studied the images with growing horror. "Neural restructuring. They're not just suppressing human consciousness, they're rewriting it entirely. Those people aren't coming back, not as themselves." The implication struck the group like a physical blow. The Dominion hadn't simply conquered humanity, they were systematically erasing human identity and replacing it with something alien. The compliant workers, the peaceful acceptance of subjugation, the gradual elimination of cultural memory, it was all part of a long-term project to transform humanity into a more suitable servant species. Kalen felt something crystallize within his chest, a cold fury that had been building for decades. The time for subtle resistance and careful planning had passed. The Veltar had revealed their true intentions, and humanity faced not just enslavement but complete extinction as a conscious species. "We need to accelerate our timeline," he said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Whatever we're going to do, it has to happen soon. Before they perfect their neural restructuring process and begin mass implementation." Zara looked up from her communication array, her fingers still working to decrypt alien data streams. "The infrastructure is nearly ready. The network we've built, the hidden communication channels, the weapons caches, we could coordinate a simultaneous strike across multiple continents. But we need something more than conventional resistance tactics." The gathering fell silent as each member contemplated the magnitude of their situation. They were a few hundred humans armed with salvaged technology, facing an alien empire that had conquered thousands of worlds. Victory through traditional warfare was impossible, but perhaps victory wasn't the only path to freedom. In the depths of those abandoned tunnels, surrounded by the shadows of humanity's past, the seed of something unprecedented began to take root. They would need to become something the Veltar had never encountered before, something that existed in the spaces between visibility and darkness, between submission and rebellion. 3 weeks after the revelation of the neural restructuring facilities, the resistance leadership gathered in a different location, an abandoned water treatment plant whose massive concrete chambers provided both acoustic dampening and electromagnetic shielding. Kalen stood before a assembled group of 50 individuals, the largest gathering in the Undercurrent's history. Each face reflected the same grim determination that had spread through their ranks like wildfire since Myra's discovery. Lydia Blackwood had spent the intervening time developing what she called the Phantom Protocol, a comprehensive psychological conditioning program designed to create the perfect invisible warrior. Her research into Veltar perception patterns had revealed a crucial weakness in their surveillance systems. The aliens perceived humans through a combination of biological signatures, behavioral patterns, and electromagnetic emanations from their neural activity. But the Veltar had never encountered humans who could consciously manipulate these signatures. The human mind is far more adaptable than the Veltar comprehend, Lydia explained, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Through specific meditation techniques combined with biofeedback training, we can teach individuals to reduce their electromagnetic footprint to near zero levels. To alien sensors, they would appear as background noise, invisible and undetectable. Dmitry Korvin had been working on the tactical applications of this breakthrough. His military background allowed him to envision how psychologically conditioned operatives could move through alien-controlled territory like ghosts, striking at crucial infrastructure points before vanishing back into the general population. "We're not talking about conventional guerrilla warfare," he emphasized. "This would be something entirely new, warriors who exist in the gaps of perception itself." Zara Thorne's technical expertise had proven essential in developing the supporting technology. Using modified meditation headsets salvaged from abandoned wellness centers, she had created biofeedback devices that could monitor and train the specific brainwave patterns required for electromagnetic suppression. Her prototype units were crude but functional, capable of teaching users to enter what they termed shadow state within weeks rather than years. The volunteers for the first experimental group came forward with a mixture of terror and excitement in their eyes. Oren Cassius stepped up first, his position within the alien administration making him an ideal candidate for invisible infiltration. Mira Ashland followed, her natural stealth ability suggesting she might adapt quickly to the enhanced conditioning. Others emerged from the crowd, maintenance workers who could access restricted areas, transport operators who moved between sectors, even teachers who worked in the youth indoctrination centers. The training regimen that Lydia developed pushed the boundaries of human consciousness. Participants spent hours in sensory deprivation chambers, learning to quiet not just their thoughts but their very presence in ways that bordered on the mystical. They practiced moving through laser grid security systems by reducing their heat signatures and electromagnetic emanations. Most remarkably, they learned to enter a state of psychological invisibility where they could stand directly beside Veltar overseers without triggering any awareness response. Kalen himself underwent the conditioning, finding the process both terrifying and liberating. In shadow state, he felt as though he was becoming something beyond human, a creature of pure will and purpose that existed in the spaces between reality and perception. The training stripped away layers of identity and social conditioning, revealing a core of crystalline determination that burned without producing light or heat. As the first graduates of the Phantom Protocol began their initial missions, a pattern of inexplicable equipment failures and data corruptions began plaguing Dominion operations. Transport pods developed mysterious malfunctions that stranded alien supervisors in remote locations. Communication arrays experienced cascading system errors that isolated orbital command ships for hours at a time. Atmospheric processors suffered precision sabotage that forced entire alien settlements to evacuate to backup facilities. The Veltar initially attributed these incidents to normal operational degradation, unaware that invisible humans were moving through their most secure installations like vengeful spirits. The aliens' confidence in their surveillance systems prevented them from considering the possibility that their human servants had developed capabilities beyond the scope of their understanding. Command Vessel Vexthera responded to the increasing disruptions by implementing enhanced security protocols and expanded surveillance coverage. But the Veltar were defending against conventional threats while facing an enemy that had transcended conventional existence. Their sensors could detect heartbeats and neural activity, but they couldn't perceive minds that had learned to become absent from their own consciousness. In the hidden chambers beneath Earth's surface, Lydia continued refining the conditioning protocols while Dmitri planned increasingly ambitious operations. The Resistance had discovered something that went beyond simple stealth technology or guerrilla tactics. They had learned to weaponize the very concept of invisibility itself, creating warriors who could exist in the blind spots of alien perception. The Shadow Legion was no longer just a concept but a growing reality, and the Veltar Dominion was about to discover that some forms of darkness could strike with devastating precision. The conditioning chambers deep beneath the ruins of the Metropolitan Museum had become humanity's most guarded secret. What had once housed priceless artifacts now contained rows of sensory deprivation pods where volunteers learned to erase themselves from existence. Lydia Blackwood moved between the pods like a high priestess of invisibility, monitoring biometric readings that tracked each trainee's progress toward complete psychological transparency. Kalen emerged from his 8th session in a state that felt like controlled death. The shadow state required him to disconnect from every aspect of personal identity, becoming a void in space that could observe and act without being observed in return. Each session pushed him further from his former self, and he sometimes wondered if the person who had entered training would still exist when the conditioning was complete. The neural pathways are stabilizing, Lydia reported as she studied his brain scan data. You're maintaining electromagnetic suppression even during conscious activity now. The Veltar sensory equipment wouldn't detect you unless you deliberately chose to become visible. Zara Thorne had established a secondary training facility in the abandoned subway maintenance bays, where graduates of the psychological conditioning learned to apply their new abilities in practical situations. The facility contained mock-ups of alien technology, holographic Veltar overseers, and sensory detection grids that challenged operatives to move through secured areas without triggering any alerts. Mira Ashland had become the program's most successful graduate, demonstrating an almost supernatural ability to exist in spaces without occupying them. She could stand inches from alien guards while remaining completely undetected, accessing restricted computer terminals and sabotaging equipment with impunity. Her reports from infiltration missions read like ghost stories, describing impossible acts of espionage performed by someone who technically wasn't there. The recruitment process for new Shadow Legion operatives had become increasingly selective. Not everyone possessed the psychological flexibility required for consciousness suppression, and several early candidates had suffered complete mental breakdowns during training. Lydia had developed screening protocols that identified individuals with naturally dissociative tendencies, often finding the best candidates among those who had already learned to psychologically disconnect from the trauma of alien occupation. Dmitri Korvin worked with the successful graduates to develop tactical doctrines that had never existed in human military history. Traditional combat required soldiers to project strength and presence, but Shadow Legion operatives needed to master the art of strategic non-existence. They learned to coordinate attacks through methods that left no communicable traces, using quantum entanglement devices that Zara had constructed from salvaged alien technology. The first major coordinated operation targeted the atmospheric processing facilities across 3 continents simultaneously. 12 Shadow Legion operatives infiltrated installations that served major alien population centers, each moving through security systems that never registered their presence. Within a 30-minute window, they introduced cascading system failures that would take weeks to repair and force mass evacuations of Veltar settlements. Command Vessel Vexthera's response revealed the alien leadership's growing concern about the unexplained operational failures. Enhanced security protocols flooded Earth's major installations with additional surveillance equipment and tripled the number of guard patrols. Orbital scan sweeps increased in frequency and intensity, bathing the planet's surface in detection beams that could identify individual humans from space. But the Veltar were still fighting an enemy they couldn't perceive or understand. Their enhanced security measures actually provided better cover for Shadow Legion operations, as the increased activity created more opportunities for invisible infiltrators to move undetected through the chaos. The aliens had never encountered a species capable of weaponizing absence itself. Oren Cassius used his position within the alien administrative hierarchy to identify high-value targets for future operations. His access to Dominion intelligence reports revealed that the neural restructuring program was accelerating rapidly, with plans to begin mass processing of human populations within 6 months. The timeline for meaningful resistance was shrinking rapidly, forcing the Shadow Legion to prepare for increasingly desperate measures. The psychological cost of shadow state conditioning was becoming apparent among the operatives. Extended periods of conscious non-existence created a form of identity dissociation that some trainees found impossible to reverse. Several operatives reported feeling like they were dissolving permanently, losing the ability to reconnect with their original personalities even when not in active mission status. Lydia established mandatory psychological rehabilitation protocols to help operatives maintain some connection to their humanity, but the balance between effectiveness and mental stability remained precarious. The Shadow Legion was creating warriors of unprecedented capability, but the price was the gradual erosion of everything that made them recognizably human. As the training program expanded and new cells established themselves in major population centers worldwide, Kalen realized they were crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. The resistance was becoming something that existed beyond normal human experience, a force that operated in the spaces between reality and consciousness. The Veltar Dominion had conquered humanity through superior technology and overwhelming force, but they were about to discover that their greatest weakness lay in the limitations of their own perception. The global communications hub rose from the center of New Geneva like a crystalline mountain, its faceted surfaces reflecting the orbital command ships that maintained constant vigil over Earth's major population centers. Within its quantum-encrypted data streams flowed the nervous system of the Veltar Dominion, coordinating the administration of 17 different worlds and countless space-based installations. Tonight, that fortress of alien intelligence would discover that it had been compromised by enemies who technically didn't exist. Mira Ashland materialized from shadow state at the base of the communications tower, her consciousness gradually reassembling itself from the deliberate void she had maintained during her approach. The transition from non-existence to awareness always felt like being born backwards, emerging from death into life rather than the reverse. Around her, the tower's security systems hummed with detection grids that could identify individual molecules, but her electromagnetic signature remained below their threshold of perception. 3 other Shadow Legion operatives manifested at predetermined coordinates around the facility's perimeter. Oren Cassius appeared within the administrative section where his legitimate access codes would allow him to reach the primary data cores. Kalen emerged in the maintenance levels where his technical expertise could access the tower's physical infrastructure. Each operative existed in a state of controlled non-being that rendered them invisible to every form of surveillance the Veltar had deployed. The operation's complexity required unprecedented coordination between individuals who couldn't communicate through normal channels without risking detection. Instead, they relied on quantum entanglement communicators that Zara Thorne had developed from salvaged alien technology. The devices allowed instantaneous information transfer between operators while producing no electromagnetic signatures that could be intercepted or traced. Mira ascended through the tower's internal structure like a ghost climbing a ladder of light. The building's artificial gravity generators and atmospheric processors created a maze of mechanical systems that would challenge any normal infiltrator, but her shadow state conditioning allowed her to move through spaces that conventional physics suggested were impossible to navigate. She flowed around security barriers and detection grids like water finding its way through cracks in stone. The central data processing chamber occupied the tower's apex, surrounded by defensive systems that could sterilize the entire level within seconds if they detected any unauthorized presence. Veltar data technicians moved between processing nodes with the fluid grace of their species, their elongated forms draped in robes that concealed advanced biomonitoring equipment. To them, the chamber appeared empty except for authorized personnel and the constant flow of information that connected their empire across the galaxy. Kalen reached his target location 3 levels below, where the tower's power distribution systems connected to the planetary energy grid. His mission required the most precise timing, as he needed to create a cascading power fluctuation that would disrupt security systems for exactly 17 seconds, long enough for the other operatives to complete their objectives without triggering facility-wide alarms. Through her quantum communicator, Mira received confirmation that all operatives were in position. The next phase would push their shadow state abilities to their absolute limits, as they needed to interact with alien technology while maintaining complete invisibility. The slightest mistake would alert the Veltar to their presence and expose the existence of the Shadow Legion. The data core access required Mira to interface directly with alien neural networks while suppressing her own consciousness to prevent detection. She extended hair-thin fiber optic cables from concealed implants in her fingertips, connecting to processing nodes that pulsed with bioelectric energy. The sensation of touching alien technology while in shadow state felt like drowning in liquid light, and she had to fight against every instinct that urged her to retreat to safer levels of existence. Information flowed through her nervous system in formats that human brains weren't designed to process. Terabytes of administrative data, communication protocols, and security algorithms passed through her consciousness like digital fire. But embedded within the stream were the files that justified every risk they were taking, complete schematics for the neural restructuring facilities and detailed plans for implementing mass population processing across Earth's major continents. The revelation was worse than their worst projections. The Veltar intended to begin wholesale neural restructuring within 3 weeks, starting with the intellectual and creative populations that posed the greatest theoretical threat to long-term stability. Artists, scientists, philosophers, and anyone who demonstrated independent thinking would be the first to undergo consciousness replacement. Within 6 months, human culture would cease to exist in any recognizable form. Oren Cassius was simultaneously accessing personnel databases and communication logs from his position in the administrative section. His discoveries revealed that similar neural restructuring programs were already underway on 12 other conquered worlds, suggesting that the Veltar had refined their population control techniques through extensive practice. Earth wasn't their first attempt at species-wide psychological modification, it was simply the latest in a long series of successful conversions. The quantum communicator network crackled with urgent data transfers as each operative transmitted their findings to the resistance leadership. The intelligence they were gathering would fundamentally change their understanding of the threat they faced and the timeframe available for meaningful resistance. But first, they needed to complete their extraction without triggering the security protocols that would expose their methods to alien analysis. Kalen initiated the power fluctuation sequence at precisely the calculated moment, sending controlled electromagnetic pulses through the tower's infrastructure. The brief disruption created windows of opportunity that allowed the other operatives to withdraw their connections and begin their descent toward extraction points. For 17 seconds, the most secure facility in the Veltar Dominion operated with degraded surveillance coverage. As the operatives dissolved back into shadow state and began their withdrawal, none of them could have predicted that their presence had been detected by sensors that operated beyond the electromagnetic spectrum entirely. Surveillance Command Post 7 orbited Earth at the edge of the magnetosphere, its crystalline arrays focused on the communications hub where impossible readings had just registered across multiple detection systems. Senior Inquisitor Zeth Mora studied the data streams with growing fascination, her elongated fingers dancing across bioneural interfaces that connected directly to her nervous system. Something had been present in the facility during the power fluctuation event, something that didn't correspond to any known form of life in the Dominion's extensive xenobiological databases. The readings defied conventional analysis. Temperature fluctuations suggested physical presence, but electromagnetic scans showed only empty space. Atmospheric displacement indicated movement, but thermal imaging revealed no heat signatures. Most intriguingly, quantum resonance detectors had registered consciousness patterns that appeared and vanished without following any logical sequence. The Veltar had encountered countless species across their empire, but never one capable of existing in states that bordered on the impossible. 3 levels below the communications hub, emergency response teams swept through the facility with enhanced detection equipment while Veltar technicians analyzed every byte of data that had been accessed during the intrusion. The findings painted a disturbing picture of systematic intelligence gathering that had been occurring for months without their knowledge. Somebody had been walking through their most secure installations like they owned them. Zethmora transmitted her preliminary analysis to Command Vessel Vexthera, where Fleet Commander Nixvalda received the report with the cold fury that had made him legendary throughout the Dominion hierarchy. The possibility that their human servants had developed capabilities beyond their understanding challenged fundamental assumptions about species hierarchy and technological superiority. If humans could become invisible to Veltar sensors, what other surprises might they be concealing? In the underground chambers where the Shadow Legion gathered, the intelligence retrieved from the communications hub had created a state of controlled panic among the Resistance leadership. Lydia Blackwood studied the neural restructuring schematics with growing horror, while Dmitry Korvin calculated the tactical implications of mass population processing beginning within 3 weeks. The timeline for any meaningful resistance had just collapsed from months to days. "They're going to start with the universities and research facilities," Zara Thorne reported as she decoded the Veltar operational schedules. "Every individual who has demonstrated independent thinking or creative problem-solving abilities will be processed first. They're not just eliminating resistance, they're performing cultural lobotomy on our entire species." Kalen felt something crystallize in his chest as he absorbed the implications. The Shadow Legion had been conceived as a tool for gradual resistance and long-term liberation, but the accelerated timeline meant they would need to attempt something unprecedented. Instead of careful sabotage and intelligence gathering, they were facing the necessity of direct confrontation with the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The quantum communicator network buzzed with reports from Shadow Legion cells across the planet. Similar data-gathering operations in other major facilities had confirmed that the neural restructuring program was indeed global in scope, with processing centers being activated simultaneously on every continent. The Veltar had learned from previous planetary conquests that gradual implementation allowed time for organized resistance to develop. Mira Ashland emerged from Shadow State training with a proposal that made everyone present question her psychological stability. She had been practicing extended periods of non-existence, pushing the boundaries of consciousness suppression beyond what the conditioning protocols recommended. Her plan involved maintaining Shadow State for unprecedented durations while infiltrating the orbital command vessels directly. "The fleet's defensive systems are designed to prevent physical assault from conventional forces," she explained, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality that suggested she was still partially disconnected from normal existence. "But they've never considered the possibility of attack by entities that exist below the threshold of perception. I can reach the command ships and introduce system failures that will disrupt their coordination during the neural restructuring implementation." Lydia Blackwood reviewed Myra's psychological profiles with grave concern. Extended Shadow State conditioning was producing permanent changes in operative consciousness, creating individuals who existed in liminal spaces between human and something else entirely. The question was whether these transformations represented evolution or dissolution. The decision to approve Myra's mission came down to a simple calculation: the risk of losing individual operatives versus the certainty of losing human consciousness entirely. Within 72 hours, millions of humans would undergo neural restructuring that would erase their capacity for independent thought. The Shadow Legion had been created to fight impossible odds, and now they were facing the ultimate test of their abilities. As Mira prepared for orbital infiltration, using modified atmospheric suits that Zara had adapted for stealth operations, the Resistance leadership grappled with the reality that they were committing their most capable operative to a mission with minimal probability of survival. But the alternative was accepting the systematic elimination of human consciousness across the entire planet. Zethmora's investigation teams had begun implementing new detection protocols specifically designed to identify consciousness patterns that operated outside normal electromagnetic parameters. The Veltar were learning to hunt enemies they couldn't see, adapting their surveillance techniques to account for forms of presence that challenged their understanding of physics itself. The stage was set for a confrontation between forces that existed on different planes of reality, an alien empire that controlled space and matter against invisible warriors who had learned to weaponize the concept of absence itself. In the space between visible and invisible, between existence and void, the future of human consciousness hung in the balance. The orbital transport that carried Mira Ashland toward command vessel Vexthera moved through the void between Earth and its moon like a mechanical prayer ascending to hostile gods. Hidden within the cargo bay's atmospheric recycling system, she existed in a state of shadow deeper than any operative had previously achieved. Her consciousness had become so thoroughly suppressed that even she wasn't entirely certain she still existed in any meaningful sense. The modifications Zara Thorne had made to the standard atmospheric suit allowed for extended void operations while maintaining the electromagnetic invisibility that made Shadow Legion operatives undetectable. But the psychological cost of maintaining non-existence for the duration required to reach and infiltrate the alien flagship pushed the boundaries of what human consciousness could endure. Mira felt herself dissolving piece by piece, her identity scattered across the quantum foam of suppressed awareness. Command vessel Vexthera stretched across 40 kilometers of space, its biomechanical architecture pulsing with the collective consciousness of the Veltar Fleet Command. The vessel served as both military headquarters and processing center for the neural restructuring operation scheduled to begin within 18 hours. Deep within its organic corridors, millions of human consciousness patterns waited in digital storage, ready to be overlaid onto the populations of Earth. The cargo transport docked with automated precision, its mechanical systems interfacing with alien technology that had conquered hundreds of worlds. As maintenance drones unloaded atmospheric processors and bioneural interfaces, Mira flowed from the transport's cargo bay like liquid shadow, her form adapted to exist in the spaces between perception and reality. Back on Earth, the remaining Shadow Legion operatives executed simultaneous strikes against the neural restructuring facilities that Oren Cassius had identified through his administrative access. The attacks required them to maintain shadow state while using explosives and electromagnetic pulse devices, pushing their conditioning to its absolute limits while attempting to destroy the infrastructure that would process human populations within hours. Kalen led a team of 12 operatives against the processing center beneath New Geneva, moving through security systems that had been specifically upgraded to detect invisible infiltrators. Zethmora's investigation had resulted in new sensor arrays that operated beyond the electromagnetic spectrum, forcing the Shadow Legion to develop countermeasures in real time. The battle between visibility and invisibility had evolved into an arms race that neither side fully understood. The facility's central processing chamber contained thousands of neural restructuring pods, each one calibrated to rewrite human consciousness according to Veltar specifications. The sight of the machinery that would transform his species into obedient servants filled Kalen with a cold fury that threatened to break his shadow state conditioning. He had to fight against every instinct that urged him to exist, to be present and visible and human in the face of such systematic dehumanization. Aboard Vexthera, Mira navigated through corridors that pulsed with alien bioluminescence, her invisible form moving past Veltar crew members who remained unaware of her presence. The ship's consciousness integration centers were located in its deepest sections, protected by defensive systems that could sterilize entire decks within milliseconds. Her mission required her to reach the core processing units and introduce cascading system failures that would disrupt the neural restructuring network across the entire fleet. The quantum communicator embedded in her nervous system crackled with reports from the surface operations. Half of the processing centers had been successfully destroyed, but others remained operational and the Veltar were rapidly implementing backup protocols. The window for preventing mass neural restructuring was closing rapidly, and success would require Mira to accomplish something that no human had ever attempted. Fleet Commander Nixvalder had relocated to the ship's primary command center, where real-time displays showed the status of neural restructuring preparations across 17 different worlds. Earth represented the culmination of decades of preparation, the final test of techniques that would be applied to future conquests. The systematic elimination of human consciousness was simply another milestone in the Dominion's expansion across the galaxy. As Mira approached the consciousness integration centers, her shadow state conditioning began to break down under the stress of extended non-existence. She could feel her identity fragmenting, pieces of her consciousness scattering like dust in solar wind. The person who had entered this mission was dissolving, leaving behind something that existed in the spaces between being and unbeing. The integration center's bioneural processors hummed with the stored consciousness patterns of millions of Veltar drones, ready to be copied and overlaid onto human neural networks. The sight of so much alien awareness concentrated in one location made Mira realize the true scope of what they were fighting. The Veltar didn't just want to control human bodies, they wanted to replace human minds entirely with copies of their own collective consciousness. Her hands, barely corporeal at this point, reached toward the primary processing nodes while her fragmenting awareness calculated the precise sequence required to introduce system failures that would cascade throughout the fleet network. But as she made contact with the alien biotechnology, alarms began to sound throughout the massive vessel. Zethmora's enhanced detection systems had finally identified the quantum signatures that Shadow Legion operatives produced when their conditioning began to fail. The hunt for invisible enemies had evolved to the point where the hunters could track their prey even in states of near non-existence. The final confrontation between visible and invisible forces was about to begin, and the fate of human consciousness hung in the balance between existence and the void beyond perception. The alarms that shrieked through command vessel Vexthera carried frequencies that penetrated quantum foam itself, designed to disrupt the consciousness suppression techniques that allowed Shadow Legion operatives to exist in states below perception. Mira Ashland felt her carefully maintained non-existence shatter like glass as the harmonic resonance forced her back into visible reality. After hours of dissolution, the sudden return to physical presence felt like being crushed by the weight of her own existence. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the vessel's consciousness integration centers while biomechanical defense systems flooded the corridors with detection fields that could identify individual atoms. Fleet Commander Nixvalder materialized in the central processing chamber, his elongated form draped in ceremonial robes that flickered with embedded neural interfaces. For the first time in 47 years of occupation, a Veltar commander was looking directly at a human who had infiltrated their most secure facility. Fascinating, Nixvalder's voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that vibrated in Myra's bones. We have been wondering what form your species' final adaptation would take. The ability to exist below our perception threshold represents a remarkable evolutionary leap, though ultimately futile. Myra's hands remained connected to the consciousness integration processors, her neural implants flooding the alien systems with cascading corruption algorithms that Zara Thorne had designed specifically for this moment. Even as security systems locked onto her position, data streams throughout the fleet network began experiencing systematic failures that would disrupt neural restructuring operations for crucial hours. On Earth's surface, Kalen led his team through the New Geneva processing facility as similar alarm frequencies forced every Shadow Legion operative back into visible existence simultaneously. The carefully planned invisibility that had protected their operations for months dissolved in an instant, leaving them exposed in the heart of enemy installations with no possibility of escape. But something unexpected happened as the operatives materialized within the processing centers. The human population scheduled for neural restructuring, thousands of individuals who had been sedated and prepared for consciousness replacement, began awakening as the facility's control systems failed. The sight of invisible warriors becoming visible triggered a psychological response that years of conditioning had failed to suppress. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neuroscientist who had been selected for early processing due to her expertise in consciousness research, staggered from her restraint pod as Kalen's team moved through the facility. "You're real," she whispered, her voice carrying wonder and terror in equal measure. "We heard rumors, stories about humans who could become ghosts. I thought it was just wishful thinking." The processing center's human population began to mobilize as their would-be liberators fought desperate battles against security systems that had been designed to be impregnable. But the Shadow Legion operatives were no longer fighting alone. Awakened humans grabbed tools and makeshift weapons, turning the sterile processing facility into a chaotic battlefield where visibility and invisibility clashed in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of conflict itself. Aboard Vexthera, Mira completed her sabotage mission even as biomechanical restraint systems closed around her failing form. The consciousness integration processors flickered and died as cascading system failures spread throughout the fleet network, disrupting neural restructuring operations across 12 different star systems. The stored consciousness patterns of millions of Veltar drones dissolved into quantum static, their collective awareness scattered beyond recovery. "You have accomplished nothing but delay," Nixvalder observed as his ship's primary systems went offline around them. "The Dominion has conquered thousands of species across the galaxy. Your resistance will be analyzed, catalogued, and countered. Future conquests will account for consciousness suppression techniques." But Myra's fragmenting awareness had access to information that the fleet commander couldn't perceive. Through her quantum communicators, she could sense Shadow Legion cells across 17 different worlds beginning to emerge from hiding, their invisibility technique spreading to resistance movements that the Veltar had believed were extinct. Humanity hadn't just developed new warfare techniques, they had created a form of resistance that could transcend physical conquest entirely. The neural restructuring failure cascaded through Veltar operations across multiple star systems as stored consciousness. Patterns proved incompatible with human neural architecture. The aliens had perfected their techniques on dozens of other species, but human consciousness possessed recursive properties that made it fundamentally incompatible with external override systems. Instead of creating obedient servants, the failed restructuring process was producing humans with enhanced awareness who could perceive Veltar psychological conditioning techniques. Lydia Blackwood's research into consciousness suppression had accidentally discovered that human minds possessed quantum properties that allowed them to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The Shadow Legion hadn't just learned to become invisible, they had learned to exist as both human and something beyond human recognition. That transformation was spreading through direct neural contact to other members of their species. As Kalen fought his way through the New Geneva facility alongside hundreds of awakened humans, he realized that victory and defeat had become meaningless concepts. The Shadow Legion had succeeded in preventing mass neural restructuring, but the cost was the exposure of techniques that had required decades to develop. They had saved human consciousness by revealing the methods that could have protected it indefinitely. Mira Ashland died aboard command vessel Vexthera as her consciousness finally dissolved beyond the ability to maintain coherent existence. But her sacrifice had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of the Veltar Dominion, the complete disruption of neural restructuring operations across their entire empire. The Invisible Warriors had struck a blow that resonated through dimensions the aliens didn't fully understand. 6 months later, as Earth began the slow process of rebuilding free human civilization, Kalen stood in the ruins of what had once been the global communications hub. The Veltar fleet had withdrawn to distant star systems, their confidence in conquest techniques shattered by an enemy that had learned to exist in spaces beyond perception. But the price of freedom had been the transformation of humanity into something that could no longer be entirely called human. The Shadow Legion had saved their species by teaching them to become shadows themselves, existing in the quantum spaces between visibility and void. They had won the war by learning to exist beyond the reach of any empire, but the victory tasted like dissolution and carried the weight of everything they had lost in learning to become invisible. In the spaces between existence and absence, humanity had found a form of freedom that no conqueror could touch, but which required them to surrender the very thing they had fought to preserve. The price of ultimate resistance had been the gradual erosion of human identity itself, leaving them free but forever changed by the darkness they had learned to call home.